Am I talking to you or the camera?
Yeah. Can only look at this camera. Not this one.
Can we start? Hi,
Hi, Mandilake. Mandy Sandy. I grew up in Durban in the 70s and 80s at the height of apartheid, and I went to school there and university there, so most of my formative years were in Durban. I, I was a Boy Scout, like literally and figuratively. Yeah, so I guess, quiet, studious, academically focused, well behaved. Um,
what do you want to be?
I always wanted to be a lawyer, always. And I don't know why there were no lawyers in my family. My father used to say to me, Brett, don't be a lawyer. Every time I go to an attorney's office, there's just piles of paper everywhere. So you don't want to do that. But anyway, I did become a lawyer and I practiced for a few years and I enjoyed practice. I did litigation, I was in court, and sometimes I miss it. But it's very helpful for the work that I do now. My father, I mean, he had this most amazing sense of justice, of right and wrong. And he taught us a few things as children, and one of them that will stay with me forever is those of us who have the power to speak have a duty to speak for those who cannot. It's quite a powerful message of leadership, and at the time in South Africa, when there were people who could not speak, otherwise they could be targeted by the apartheid regime. It was quite a strong message, and it was the way he lived his life. I mean, he would speak up for people all the time, speak up for injustices. He would even go to the supermarket and complain if the price of an avocado was 99 cents today and 2 rand tomorrow. He'd say, "How does this avocado go up 2 rand in one day?" So he was just someone who spoke out. Um, Look, I spoke about my father earlier, and he was in the 1970s on the Durban Council in Durban City Council, and he was elected as the chairperson of the Health and Housing Committee. In those days, councils were structured differently. They didn't have executive mayors and councils with executive authority, but he was the equivalent of an MMC for health and housing. And we spent all our weekends driving around looking at housing projects and how people were living in um, what were then called colored and African townships, really. And so the political awakening was from a young age. I told you the story about writing this poem after going on that bus trip. So I don't know, how did I learn that it was what I was seeing was wrong? I'm not sure how I learned that, but I observed it from a very young age. And when I was at university, I was involved in student politics. Um, and then I left university when Madiba was released from prison, when the ANC was unbanned, the PAC was unbanned, so the liberation movements were unbanned. Um, I finished, that was at the end of my LLB degree, so 5 years of university was exactly the time when the change was starting to happen in South Africa. Um, and so then I went and became a lawyer and thought that we were living in the Rainbow Nation and everything was perfect. I went to live in America for 4 years. I came back in 2001, and it was a few years later that I read about the arms deal. And then I thought, no, something is definitely wrong with this democracy if the arms deal allegations are true. And so that's how I got involved in politics again, really through reading Andrew Feinstein's book, which is called After the Party. And I was horrified by what I read. And I said to my family, either I have to get involved or I have to leave again. And so that's how I'm here. Yeah, I mean, there's lots. And I think you were almost involved in one of them. Remember when I think we announced that here's one big failure. It taught me a lot. we announced that we wanted to do the end to express my city bus service between Khayelitsha, Mitchells Plain, and Cape Town. And I think you were eventually involved in that project and helping us engage with communities. But we announced that without engaging with the taxi industry at all. And I was in the Civic Center one day, and there were like thousands of taxi operators who arrived at the Civic Center to demand that I come and speak to them. And I had to make a public apology, which is record. I mean, the video is available where I had to apologize for making an announcement about them without them. So that was a big mistake that I learned. And then there are failed projects but those failures are not my failures. They're the failures that I experienced of the system that I was in at the time, and the resistance from the people that I was working with. So there were some really good projects that we promised people, which 10 years later today have still not been delivered. But they're not my personal failures, but I had to walk away because of those failures. I moved in 1994. Um, I'd been to Cape Town on holidays and stuff, and I always just wanted to move here. There was something about the space that I wanted to live here, and so I really made work of it. I mean, I was actively looking to work here and live here. And I moved here in 1994, and then I moved to New York in 1997, 1998, the end of 1997, beginning of 1998. And I worked and lived in New York for 3 years, and then I came back in 2001. In fact, I came back to Cape Town. Um, I left New York on the first flight that was allowed to take off after 9/11, because I was there for 9/11. I was booked to fly back, so I mean, I didn't leave because of 9/11. But they had grounded all flights, if you remember, back to 9/11. And the first flight that was allowed to take off was the flight that I was on. Um, and that's when I came back, September 2001. Um, for me, there was just something that pulled me here. It's hard to put a finger on it. I mean, Cape Town's got lots of problems. Um, and I guess the problems have become even more pronounced as I've lived here since coming back from New York. But in 2000, in the early 2000, 1994, when I moved here, um, I was attracted to the landscape, the lifestyle. Not that it was much different to the lifestyle that I had in Durban and stuff, but it was the there was just something about Cape Town that I loved. I can't even articulate it. Uh, I love this. I love the city centre, and being able to walk that St George's Mall is one of my favourite places. Um, I mean, for leisure, I enjoy taking the dogs to Noted Beach and Muizenberg Beach. So Cape Town is a remarkable space if you think about all the diversity of urban development even and underdevelopment. But it's a remarkable place, and I love. There isn't a part of Cape Town that I don't love other than the human suffering on the Cape Flats. I do take them to the city centre because I think it's a special place through the company gardens. Um, I do try and persuade them, and I'm not making this up, but I do try and persuade them to see the whole of Cape Town. And I have had visitors who are like, "Yeah, let's go," and we'll go into Langa, Inyanga, um, townships that I know well, so I know where I'm going, and so that people can see what it is like off the tourist beaten track. So so I try and persuade them, and people are people who visit me are genuinely keen to see that. So we'll take them on the most beautiful drive in the world is surely Chapman's Peak Drive. So they, from a tourist perspective, I'll do that. There's the people who are just die hard, that this city is perfect because of the bubble that they live in, maybe the privileged communities, without um, being willing to entertain that for some people it's not perfect. And I experience that mostly on social media. So you have people who trot out um, the arguments around well-run, clean, well-governed. My environment is clean. So there's this disconnect between the reality for some people and and those people who are unwilling to open their minds and their hearts to other people's reality. So there is an elitism, I think, sometimes in Cape Town that some people are not willing to open their minds to the fact that the administration of Cape Town may be solid, but that it doesn't reach everybody. And so it frustrates me greatly that you've got to continuously make arguments that are obvious. They're obvious if you drive on the N2 that this place is not perfect and that there are communities that are neglected because you see the shacks, you see the portable toilets. If you just drove off the N2, and I know maybe people are frightened to do so, but I'll take them on a tour if they want to go on this tour. Just go and see, and realize that there are people in this beautiful city that has got an excellent balance sheet. It's got a sound administration. It currently has a majority government, so it's stable government. And beyond the areas that that are that people who do not want to see, beyond those areas where they spend their time, people are struggling. People are hungry. People are living in appalling conditions. Some of those people are living in informal um, dwellings like shacks, and some of those people who are still struggling and suffering are living in formal housing, even housing that's been provided by the state, RDP or BNG, the free basic housing. Even those people are still struggling with poor infrastructure, poor social economic environments, conditions, um, struggles about schooling, struggles about violence. So it frustrates me greatly that there are people who don't want to see or don't want to know. Yeah, I think it is for all of us. Um, and so this is, a- I mean, the let's just talk about the affordability crisis. Um, the For middle income families and obviously for poorer families, it's a becoming a very hard place to live and a very hard place to keep your home. I mean, I have a lovely home here in Newlands, um, but it is increasingly unaffordable. The recent property valuation process that the city has undertaken has decided that my property value has increased 33% since the previous valuation, which was done in 2022. And so the indicative rates increase that I will experience because of that was like 30%, was 29.8% that my rates will go up. And I had to say to Andre, my partner, maybe we have to sell because there's no way. I mean, our household income hasn't increased. So the development um, priorities of the city's leadership has been to attract digital nomads who are renting out at astronomical prices, second and third property that people own, reducing the amount of rental accommodation available to Cape Townians, and pushing the value of properties up. And actually, you ask, other than eating in restaurants and stuff, what contribution do they make back to Cape Town? Why was this drive to recruit foreigners to come and work remotely here? Um, they they earn in dollars, or euros, so their earnings are taxed elsewhere. They just live here for a couple of months a year, work online, um, I'm not sure what value they add to the Cape Town. Um, and what they do is allow landlords who have second and third properties as investments to charge unaffordable rental prices, which means that there's the housing crisis in Cape Town is exacerbated for everybody, including middle income families whose young adult children are unable to leave home because there's nowhere to live or nowhere to rent or nowhere to buy. I think it is hard. And when you speak to people who live in Cape Town, and as I do all the time, I ask them, "Do you feel like you live in Cape Town?" And very often the question that I ask is answered like, "No." Yes, we can. Um, this the Cape Town um, draft budget for 2026-2027 to the DA's last budget of when they're in this term of office has got um, a lot of fat in it. So we have to start with reducing the expenditure side of the City of Cape Town's budget in order to reduce the burden on property owners or residents to contribute towards funding that fat. So, for example, in the current budget, if you look at it carefully, there is almost 1 billion rand allocated to IT services and software. There is the Safety and Security Directorate has had a almost 25% increase in their budget over the last 3 or 4 years to where they are the largest consumer, largest department in the operational budget, sitting on a budget of about 7 billion rand. And you have to ask, have we measured the outcomes? Is Cape Town safer? We all know that Cape Town's not safer. They've added almost 40% increase in staffing in the safety and security department alone. So we need to look at the expenditure side. Why are we spending almost 1 billion rand on IT and software and licensing? We need to look at the safety and security budget and make sure that its outcomes measured. There's also some you must tell me if I'm getting too detailed, but there's some tricky accounting methodology that's gone on in this budget. For example, the free basic services budget, which is free basic services, electricity, water, and sanitation services to poor households, is now at 5.4 billion rand, and the DAs are bragging this is the largest free basic services allocation in the country. But actually, the real free basic services budget is about 3.3 billion rand, and the extra 1.8 billion rand that they've added is an accounting methodology change. So they haven't increased the number of people in Cape Town who are receiving free basic services. They've just changed how they measure the cost of it. And so they are taking 1.8 billion rand almost from the equitable share, saying it has been allocated to free basic services, but burdening property owners with high property rates to cover for this cleaning levy that was determined as unlawful by the High Court. So it gets complicated, but yes, it is reversible if we have an honest budget. That cleaning levy is a fake tariff. General cleaning services were always part of a service that a city provides in street cleaning and area-based cleaning. Their justification for that cleaning levy at the time when they introduced it in 2025, if you read the tariff policy, it's mostly about events, cleaning up after events, etc. But if you are an organizer of big events, you have to have a waste management plan before you get your events permit. So there's something dishonest in that cleaning levy, which they've now added back into the property rates and pushed property rates up. So if we are honest about the budget, if we cut the fat, and if we stop playing these accounting tricks around free basic services, we can make it more affordable. I think what politicians get wrong lies in the way in which those who have executive power, so they make decisions without consulting properly. So there's a massive problem around transparency and transparent decision making. So decisions are made about um, communities, community assets, community development, development rights, development projects, and there is a lack of engagement with communities. So there's a real need, especially in Cape Town, for our government to become more people-centered and to engage with communities around what their needs are and how the government can respond to those needs. There's also a real need for a meaningful public engagement process around major decision making. This planning bylaw that I was talking about earlier, I was in Phoenix, which is one of the communities that is identified as having the right to build 8 to 12 flats on a property. Um, and suddenly this community, which is very densely populated, small urban, narrow roads, they're having these buildings go up and they're completely unaware of the municipal planning bylaw amendments. So we have to change the way in which government engages with communities. And I think in Cape Town, we have sub-councils. So if we're going to keep the sub-councils, which are very expensive structures, and currently the sub-councils have no powers, but they have chairpersons who earn an executive salary, the same salary as a MACO member, and they meet to give input and advice on council decision making, rather than giving those sub-councils actual decision making and decision making powers and budgets. So we need to develop some budget for participatory budgeting, so communities can come to the sub-councils and say, we need this sports field, for example, to be maintained and fenced and developed, and the sub-council should be able to prioritize projects in their geographic area. So what we get wrong is making decisions without people. I think government overcomplicates almost everything. And they will do things in the Western Cape Provincial Legislature or Western Cape government just recently passed an amendment to the Land Use Planning Act, which they say is to cut red tape. But what they are doing in their cutting red tape is allowing municipalities to amend their planning processes to reduce the public participation requirements, and for planning tribunals to regard spatial development frameworks as advisory rather than as defining how spatial development should take place. So they think that they are cutting red tape and making stuff easier. But what they're actually doing is, first of all, undermining all the work that's gone into the spatial planning logic. So municipalities and the City of Cape Town has a spatial development framework which says these are the corridors that should be densified, these are the areas that should be protected. Now the Municipal Planning Tribunal, which according to Daily Maverick has been captured, now the Municipal Planning Tribunal can just have regard to the spatial development framework, but is not bound by the spatial development framework. So we complicate things by having these plans like the spatial development framework, the transit-orientated development framework, the integrated public transport network, but none of them are binding according to this new legislation. And we also reduce the need for municipalities to engage with communities and run proper public participation processes. So on the one hand, for the municipality, it gets easier, but for the people, life gets much more difficult because it's much less predictable. It's complicated. The reasons are complicated and they're multiple. I mean, first of all, it's just about a sense of justice. Um, and I don't think, I mean, yes, I grew up in the apartheid era as a white boy, so I have all the privileges that come with that, and those privileges allow me to live in the leafy suburbs because they are systemic. They were there, and I went through my childhood and my education and the career prospects that I have are largely because of the privileges that I have as a white child growing up in apartheid. So I have to own that privilege, and I do own it. I fully understand it, um, but that doesn't mean that I don't have a sense of justice and what's right and wrong. So I understand that my privilege is unearned. The privilege was because of the color of my skin, and probably my gender in an apartheid country. And by the time 1994 came, I was already qualified as an attorney. I'd finished my training and I was now an attorney. So my entire, um, the foundation of my success or is based on that privilege. But I mean, just living in the leafy suburbs doesn't mean that I can't understand or, or empathize with the injustices of those who did not have that privilege. And I've shared the story already that I experienced that injustice even as a high school kid on a tour in Umlazi and Kwamashu and those communities, um, and became awakened to the injustice at a young age. So and I think that it would be really helpful if more South Africans who live in privileged environments, who have had the privilege of the apartheid system, or who even were born post-apartheid but in white families or in privileged environments, um, had a sense of solidarity with those who are suffering and struggling. It's a human response. It's not a white response. It's not a privileged response. It's a human response to respond to the suffering of other people. And if more people who live in privileged environments or come from privilege would look at what they see around them and think, this is not normal. And in Cape Town, it's impossible for anyone to deny that they don't know it exists. Because if you drive on the N2 highway, which anyone who lives in Cape Town eventually has to do to get anywhere, you are confronted with shacks and portable toilets almost the full length of that N2 highway. And you cannot drive on the N2 highway and look left or right and think that that way of living is normal and acceptable. And so I would really encourage people of privilege who live in the leafy suburbs or don't even live in the leafy suburbs. I mean, there are people of privilege or who don't live in these environments, but like just look around you and think, this is not normal, this is not fair, this is not justice. These are human beings living in there, and we have to do something about it. So yes, I live in the leafy suburbs, but that doesn't mean that I can't have solidarity with people who aspire to live in better conditions. My skin is much thicker than it was when I first started. I used to be so easily wounded by the insults and the criticism that you get when you do things, and I guess the adage is true. I mean, if you're not being criticized or attacked, then you're doing nothing. So I was doing something, but I guess politics is well, politics evolves. Your political thinking evolves, and and the solutions that you see for your city evolve. So politics has enabled me to move beyond the scope of my um, political interest, which was about justice, to actually, when I was in executive office, understanding urbanism, which encouraged me then, or motivated me then, to go to the London School of Economics and get a master's degree in cities, because I fell in love with the idea of how cities work and how they can work better. And so I went and studied it. Um, and so being in politics allowed me to get into an executive office position, put me in transport, which when I was asked to do transport, I thought, how can I know nothing about transport, but in being in that position, learning how cities work, how transport connects to land use, how land use connects to housing, how development should take place. So I sort of fell in love with urbanism, studied it, and I'm still, as you can hear, highly animated around urban development and how it should take place. So politics benefited me personally in broadening my um, my limited scope of understanding cities and how they function and how they can function better and what should happen. So I became not just a lawyer, but also an urbanist. It changed me fundamentally as a person. Anyone who's in politics who says they've never thought of walking away is lying, because it's difficult. It's difficult first of all for someone who's sensitive. And I experience when I go into communities, I feel I'm very sensitive to the pain, to the suffering, to the struggles that people have. So it hurts me, and I guess I'm pained and motivated by seeing how the injustice of the inequality in which we haven't addressed in post-apartheid democracy is very painful to see. And then it's very demanding, and it's so sometimes you do wake up in the morning and think, why am I doing this? It's difficult. The impact, you have to work hard to have to make an impact, and sometimes you don't even see the impact you're making. So there are no instant rewards in politics. You do it because you believe in a greater good. And when you have doubts, which sometimes you wake up in the morning and say, why am I doing this? I could just be practicing law, have a nice luxury life, quiet life, weekends to do whatever I like. So there are moments when I think, why am I doing this? Yo, there's so much that keeps me awake at night. Um, I mean, if it's raining, I mean, like pouring with rain, then I think about the people whose whose homes are leaking, and their homes are sometimes a shack. I think I visit communities all the time, and I see animals that are chained up or locked up outside, and I think about these spoiled brats who are sleeping on soft beds in a warm environment. Um, I, I worry about um, our country, its future. I mean, I am serious. I guess even when my eyes are closed, I'm serious. And at 2 o'clock in the morning when I wake up, it's usually in response to something environmental. So usually rain wakes me up, and then my head starts worrying about what is happening outside of this comfortable environment. The obvious answer is the role of um, large donors in political decision making. We must remember that at local government level, you have government, which is the political party that's won the election, and the administration. I think in Cape Town we have an excellent administration with properly qualified professionals who understand how development should take place in Cape Town and would like to see it taking place using their professional knowledge and their experience in accordance with universally acceptable um, thinking around urban development, especially in rapidly urbanizing cities. So you have the professionals, you have a sound administration, you have good financials, but then you've got the government, which are the politicians. And what often happens is the the advice, the the planning work that is done by the administration is overruled or undermined by the politicians, who introduce stupid decision making, which is influenced by party political funders. And so often, as a resident, you may sit back if you really think about stuff and think, why did they make that decision? And invariably, it will lead to the interests of a party funder and not the interests of the whole of Cape Town or the whole of the city, if we're not talking about Cape Town and we're talking more generally. Um, the interests of the community a government is elected to serve is not the priority because there's influence from funders. So I mean, I relay a story and I'll relay it again. I've relayed it a few times. Um, After the 2016 elections, I was appointed. We restructured the city and we created the Transport and Urban Development Authority, which was to do public transport, formal new housing, and spatial planning. And we put it in one because they should be in one. I mean, they all, you need to plan in a coherent way rather than in three different directorates planning in different directions. And we then launched this inner city affordable housing plan, which identified land that belonged to the city that could be used to develop affordable housing. And we announced it. And we then ran a whole week of public information sessions where people would come and express what they felt about this project. And it was a really good project. And then I was asked by the current mayor, who was then a member of parliament, Jordan Hill Lewis, to go. I was asked by the DA actually to go with Jordan Hill Lewis to a donor who was a property developer in Woodstock, in the area where we had identified these land parcels. And in the Democratic Alliance, this is how it works. If you bring in a donor or you are assigned to manage a donor, you manage the donor over the lifetime of their donation. So you will go annually to that donor and ask for their annual contribution. And so Jordan had to do his annual visit, and so he went, and I went, and I had to. They wouldn't see him unless I came with, which was very unusual. So I met him there, and we met with the donors, and I was sort of almost cross-examined, like what is this affordable housing project? I was asked by these property developers; these are educated business people. Do I mean tent cities? Am I going to put up tents on these sites, like refugee camps? It was bizarre. Anyway, I was cross-examined and asked about these projects, and then I was asked to leave the meeting, and Jordan stayed behind, and I left, and they were obviously going to talk about the financial contribution. The interesting thing is that because I was in the meeting, the Democratic Alliance sent a report every single month on that donation, and I was copied in now because I'm now, I guess, a co-donor manager. So I was copied in for months on the donation report, and every month it said 0, 0, 0. So they didn't give a donation from the time we had that meeting until the time I left in November 2018, and the meeting must have taken place in late 2017. It's almost a year. And then in December 2018 or February 2019, I can't remember, it was like either the last council of the year or the first council of the next year, the new mayor and the new mayor member after we left announced that all those projects were cancelled. So I saw firsthand how a funder influenced a policy decision of a government. So I mean, yes, that is exactly it. And that is why I say to people when I'm in poorer communities who are fatigued by broken promises and by the fact that their living conditions have not changed, and they will say, "I'm not going to vote. It makes no sense. Nothing changes." And then I have to remind them that if they don't vote, the people who do show up to vote will be making decisions about their lives or decisions that completely neglect them. So the people, the government is elected by the people who show up to vote, and invariably, especially in Cape Town, there's a differential turnout between wealthy communities and poorer communities. And so the people who are showing up to vote and who are electing the Democratic Alliance into government are disproportionately more affluent communities. And so the government is making decisions to protect their voting base. And their voting base includes their funders. My partner Andre always says that people think I'm very, very serious, but he said no one will believe what you say behind closed doors. So I have a sense of humor, but I do love watching comedy on TV and movies and stuff, and that makes me laugh. Um, I mean, yeah, people telling me jokes, funny stories, those kind of things make me laugh, and But I'm also a big crybaby, so I cry when people do well, or cry sometimes in movies. So I laugh and cry. I'm just a human being. I mean, I am very serious about the work, so I understand why people see the serious side of me only, because that's in the public space. I'm usually speaking about something that I think that I feel quite strongly about. If I have no tasks to do or meetings to attend or invitations from some organization to attend one of their meetings, which happens all the time in politics, I have three beautiful dogs, and I walk the dogs. I go to the gym because on a weekend I can spend more time working out at the gym. On weekdays, it's usually a quick rushed workout in the morning. So I'll go to the gym, I'll walk the dogs, and probably go to dinner. So the weekends, I try and make them a weekend if I can.
Okay.
And I've seen my mother. There are lots of things I'm not good at. I can't cook. I can't at all.
No.
No, I can't. I have to follow a recipe to make anything. And Andre, my partner, years ago, we just met, like so 20 years ago. I was cooking something for him from a recipe book that I've been given as a gift, and I always made the same thing out of that recipe book. This chicken cooked in like a champagne sauce. So I was making it, and Andre is trained in the hospitality industry. So he said, "No, no, you're doing this all wrong." He took over the kitchen, and I've never cooked again.
See,
There are lots of things to do, but let's start by saying we will um, take a resolution to council to stop the sale of public assets and land. This current government is on um, this unbelievable rapid path of selling off assets and land. I mean, it's like it's like a fire sale or like a closing down sale almost. They've sold the Good Hope Centre, they've sold the Belleville Velodrome. They are selling large parcels of land all over the city. There's a piece of land in Century City, 25,000 square meters of land, that they sold for 53 million rand. It's probably worth several hundred million rand. And it is the perfect place to build public housing, affordable housing, because Century City is now regarded as the third most important employment node in Cape Town. Cape Town CBD the first, Belleville the second, Century City the third. And we must remember on the other side of Century City is Montague Gardens. So there's the Century City railway station, there's the My City bus service, there's the whole Canal Walk Century City complexes where there are offices and retail employers. And then on the other side of Century City is Montague Gardens. So we have to stop the sale of all these parcels of land, because you cannot in 2026 decide that that the municipality has no future need for a piece of land. How do you decide in 2026, when land is finite, that you will not need this in the future? Um, let's just talk about, okay, I mean, the land parcels that we identified in 2018 are still undeveloped. So there are 5 or 6 parcels that when I was the MACO member for transport and urban development, that I identified for housing. And those have not been developed almost a decade later. But let's just look for new places that are underutilized. All those parking lots in Batencrux Street, um, that you can keep parking on the ground level, but still develop affordable housing above them. At the corner of Strand Street and Batencrux Street, there are 2 parking lots, both belong to the city, can be used for affordable housing, public housing. Um, so there are, the parking lot, and I see the city's now decided to put it out um, for sale. They call it releasing the land, but they're really selling it. That huge parking lot next to the Civic Centre, we identified in 2017 as a site that should be developed for affordable housing. It's currently a parking lot. So parking lots are very interesting because they're at their service level, they take up a lot of space, and there's no reason why can't keep the parking at service level and build above. Um, Cape Town's future is unsustainable, um, and it's going to be um, a the the development of Cape Town, the way it's being developed, um, the way that this government is encouraging the densification of certain communities, this recent municipal planning bylaw amendment that I've been fighting almost like a lone voice since it was adopted in June 2025, is an unsustainable development model. The lack of investment in communities that were created during apartheid to dump people as they were forcefully removed. The communities that were established because African South Africans, African black South Africans were regarded as not South African, and they have their own unique living environment. That the failure to address that 32 years after democracy is producing an unsustainable future for all of us. And so going back to your earlier question about how do you know, why does it bother you live in the leafy suburbs? What do you care? Um, my future is connected to the people's, all people in Cape Town's future. Our future is we're all connected, and so the development model, the lack of leadership in addressing the conditions that people are living in, the underinvestment in those communities, the idea, as the current mayor, Jordan Hill Lewis, has described, that as far as he's concerned, there will always be informal settlements. As far as he's concerned, you can buy an affordable house in Mitchell's Plain. Those are the words he said. That's not the kind of leadership that I would like to see for Cape Town. I think that Cape Town has the potential, with visionary leadership, to address all of those challenges, improve the quality of life without destroying the quality of life for others. There's a lack of vision, a lack of leadership, and the living conditions of people, the majority of people in Cape Town, is not sustainable. I do it because nothing has changed. I mean, we we abandoned apartheid in 1994 in terms of electing a democratic government. We committed to reconstruction and development, um, and which is RDP is actually the Reconstruction and Development Program, and it's more than just housing. It was fundamentally changing our the apartheid system, which was a system of unearned privilege for white South Africans. And honestly, 32 years later, that hasn't changed. It hasn't changed. I mean, the laws may have changed, and we may have changed, and we may have introduced redress legislation around economic rights, access to economic opportunities, the things that organizations like AfriForum are challenging, broad-based black economic empowerment, employment equity. But fundamentally, South Africa hasn't changed enough for everybody. A luta continua. Um, the ordinary South Africans who are doing amazing work. So it's like, I guess you could call them like acupuncture points. Like they're not, the impact is small, but is meaningful. And there are so many, there are thousands of people, and we'll see it through the campaign. You'll see it if you work in communities. You'll see it when you visit communities that there are people who are doing um, little things in the grand scheme of injustice and deprivation and lack of access to resources. There are people who are feeding hundreds of kids every day. Um, I was at a soup kitchen in Mitchell's Plain, operated by a neighborhood um, mother, and you just see lines of hundreds and hundreds of hungry children, and her impact is for those hundreds of children, when we've got 53% of the Western Cape is food insecure. But what gives me hope is the the kindness of human beings that you'll meet every day. Despite the politics of division, there's a huge amount of kindness of people who are trying to improve the lives of others or help. It would be, I guess, the message that we delivered when we launched our mayoral campaign, that where you live matters. And where you live determines whether you live in a safe environment or a violent one, whether your children have access to good schools or poor quality schools, or whether your children have to be bussed out of the area to find a school that's got a place for them, whether your children have a decent opportunity to lead a successful adult life, whether you have access to amenities and sports facilities and recreational facilities, whether you have access to jobs or whether you have to commute for 2 hours. Where you live matters, and we need a government that understands that it shouldn't matter and that we have to fix the fact that it does. Yeah, it is a good question, and I mean, people say, you were there, what did you do? And I mean, first of all, you can just Google my name and you can see and what I did between 2010, when I first joined the mayoral committee, and 2018. But I worked really hard on launching and implementing an integrated public transport network so that people could access the city more easily. So I was responsible for the rollout of the My City bus service, which was the most successful BRT, bus rapid transit project in the country, and I was responsible for that for a long time. I told you about my blunder when I announced that the BRT needed to be extended to Mitchell's Plain and Khayelitsha. The two most densely populated parts of the city were not in the City of Cape Town's plans when I inherited the My City bus plan. I mean, I inherited it because it was conceived or conceptualized when Helen Zille was still the mayor. So I only came into council later, but I inherited a My City plan, which I changed, but we implemented phase one as it was planned under Helen Zille's term of office. But Khayelitsha and Mitchell's Plain were not on that plan. The N2 Express, the bus service that runs from Mitchell's Plain and Khayelitsha, was a project that I said there's no way that the most densely populated parts of our city do not have access to this system, especially as the rail system was declining already. So the N2 Express service from Mitchell's Plain and Khayelitsha of the My City bus service to Cape Town was something that I started, initiated, and implemented. And it was operating very, very well until after I left, when the people who took over had a fight with the taxi industry and with the bus operators, and that service was suspended for almost 3 years. It didn't operate as they were unable to resolve their differences. It's now operating again. So that's something I did. Then I started, I think, after really being encouraged by organizations like Ndufuna Ukwazi and Reclaim the City, because I don't want to take all the credit for the work, but they were agitating around access to affordable housing. I had been the ward councillor for Woodstock, Salt River Observatory, that area that's right next to the city centre. And so I was, in that period that I was ward councillor from 2011 to 2016, I was increasingly aware of the impact of gentrification and what that does to people who've lived in a community all their lives. They get displaced. And very often when they're displaced through eviction, they are offered an alternative accommodation by the city in Wolverrivier or Blickisdorp, far away in terribly inhumane conditions. So my awakening around the urgency of affordable housing happened in that period. My reawakening. And so that affordable housing project that we launched in 2017 identified 6 or 7 parcels of land that we put out to developers who had to partner with social housing companies to develop market-related housing, affordable housing, and social housing all on one site. And the prospectus said that the development had to be tenure blind. So you were not supposed to look at the development and say, okay, that's where the rich people live, that's where the poor people live. The buildings had to be done and built in such a way that they were tenure blind, so you couldn't identify poor and rich on the same site. That project was cancelled by the DA after I left. I told you the story already. But now Jordan is re-releasing all of those sites 10 years later for affordable housing. So I take credit for changing the focus and the awareness of the need for an affordable housing project, and for identifying the parcels of land that Jordan can re-release 2 or 3 times a year. In the spatial planning space, I introduced a whole new concept for the spatial logic for the city of Cape Town, where we identified that we need to densify along high order corridors. So like Voortrekker Road was one of them. And so if you look at the spatial development logic that currently is being pushed by the city, but now undermined by the Western Cape government's new piece of legislation, that development model, if the city would implement it, is something that really would change the way in which our city operates and functions as a sustainable city. So I mean, I take credit for a lot of change in the city of Cape Town, including change in awareness around affordable housing. There were other projects that I wanted to claim credit for, but they escape me now. What I would like people to remember about me, that I lived up to the message or the lesson or the guidance that I received from my father, that those of us that are able to speak up have a duty to speak for those who cannot, and that I have lived that and still do every single day. I speak up for those who are silenced or feel they are silenced.